While grinding the kebab spices, my entire body was drenched in sweat. I was sweating so heavily that my clothes clung to my body and strands of hair stuck to my neck. In my anger, I had also tossed aside my dupatta. Initially, this chore hadn't seemed difficult, but repeating the same task day after day can make anyone weary. At that moment, I was making kebabs with great frustration. Deep down, I wanted to grind my husband and his friend's flesh instead of these kebabs. I hadn't even finished grinding the spice when my husband came in, and upon seeing that the kebabs weren't ready yet, he got angry. He said, "You're such a lazy woman. I make just one request all day, and you can't even fulfill that." I felt like throwing something at his head and telling him, "I do all the housework all day and cook as well. Then in the middle of the night, you dump this kebab chore on me." But before I could say anything, my husband's Patan friend walked in. The moment I saw him, I realized I wasn't wearing my dupatta. He was staring at me intently. Embarrassed, I lowered my gaze. My dupatta was lying far away, and I couldn't just get up to retrieve it, as my hands were dirty. Plus, I was furious that my husband didn't seem to notice or care. He would bring another man into our home every day, never stopping to think about my state or my appearance. Even right then, I was soaked in sweat, yet he didn't care at all. The only thing on his mind was that the kebabs weren't ready. Quickly, I said to my husband, "You go on, I'll have them ready soon." I just wanted to get rid of his friend somehow. My husband said, "We'll be sitting in the garage at the back. Once the kebabs are ready, give me a call and I'll come get them myself." With that, he left, taking his friend along with him. But as his friend was leaving, the look he gave me left me burning with shame. His gaze seemed glued to my body, and there was a gleam in his eyes that made me feel like he could see right through me. I wanted to tell my husband to stop bringing his friend inside the house, but he already got angry with me over every little thing. If I said anything against his one and only friend, he'd probably throw me out of the house. This marriage, my love marriage, felt like a drum around my neck, which I could neither remove nor play. It's true what people say. Love blinds a person, and the scales only fall from your eyes when it's already too late. Gradually, my love blindness was lifting, and I was starting to see the harsh realities of life. Life isn't just about romance and love. There are many other problems one faces after marriage. After they left, I angrily resumed grinding the kebab mixture. About half an hour later, I finally finished preparing it. My husband and his friend never seemed to tire of eating kebabs day after day, but I was exhausted from making them. Both my shoulders ached terribly. After frying the kebabs, I phoned my husband to let him know they were ready. Shortly after he came, filled a plate with shami kebabs, and went back. I slumped down, holding my aching shoulders. I was sitting in the lounge, massaging my shoulders, when my husband's Patan friend walked into the house. Seeing me, he asked, "What's the matter, Bobby, sister-in-law? Are your shoulders hurting?" Anger welled up inside me, yet I forced a smile on my face and asked if he needed anything. He replied that he wanted a bottle of water and a glass, adding that if I was tired, he could get them himself. He was so familiar with our home that he knew where everything was, and my husband had given him free rein over the household. So he went into the kitchen on his own, brought back a bottle and a glass, and instead of leaving, he came closer to me. He said, "If you'd like, I can bring you some kind of remedy for your pain." Grinding the kebab spices must have worn you out. I shook my head in refusal, and he walked out, looking at me as he left. I stomped my feet and went to my room. Even though this was my own home, I felt neither peace nor any sense of security. I didn't like my husband's friend, nor did I like the way he looked at me. There was something in his gaze, something so different that it always startled me. Even in the room, I paced restlessly. When the clock struck 2 a.m. and my husband still hadn't left his friend to come to our room, my anger spiked. We had been married for 8 months, yet my husband's routine had never changed. He would come to bed around 3 or 4 a.m, claim he was exhausted, and go straight to sleep. Then he'd wake up late and leave for who knows what business. I didn't know what work he did or how he earned money. All I knew was that I'd fallen blindly in love with him. left my family and home to be with him. In the beginning, he treated me very well, but as time passed, he got busier. Or maybe he simply got bored with me. That realization left me deeply upset. I wanted him to spend time with me, pay attention to me, speak loving words as he used to. But there was nothing of the sort in his demeanor anymore. When he finally did come to our room, tired and worn out, he had neither time nor a few words of affection to give me. That night, 3 o'clock came and went, and my husband still hadn't returned. Feeling uneasy, I left my room and headed toward the garage. I had planned to call out to my husband, loudly asking how much longer he would be, hoping his friend would take the hint and leave. But as soon as I neared the garage, I ran into my husband's friend first. Perhaps he was on his way back into the house, or maybe he'd noticed I was coming and came out to intercept me. I thought to tell him, "For God's sake, please go home now. Let us live our lives. You're here every single day." But before I could say a word, he grabbed my hand and asked, "Bobby, where are you going?" His sudden touch startled me. I stammered that I was going to call Farhan, that I couldn't sleep alone and was feeling afraid. He smiled and, still holding my hand, said, "Come on, I'll take you inside. Farhan isn't in the garage." His words made me anxious. "Where is Farhan?" I asked. He told me Farhan had gone out for something and would be back soon. I was stunned. In the middle of the night, my husband wasn't even at home, and here was his friend holding my hand so boldly. I wanted to free myself, but he was such a tall, broad-shouldered man that pulling away wasn't easy. He held my hand and led me all the way to my bedroom, and I couldn't utter a single protest. It felt like my voice had left me in his presence. I had stormed off toward the garage in a rage, but I returned to my room utterly powerless. He had me lie down on the bed while still holding my hand, and then he placed a sheet over me, moving closer as he said, "Bobby, you are a very beautiful woman. Take care of yourself. Farhan doesn't pay much attention to you, but I do. I know you get tired making kebabs for us all the time." He leaned in so close that I found it difficult to breathe. Then with a smile, he tucked the sheet around me and left the room. Only then did I feel like I could finally breathe again. I thought to myself that I must tell Farhan about his friend's behavior and insist that he stop letting him into our home. This was the first time his friend had been so bold. Until now, he had only scanned me with his gaze, but this time he had come so close that I could hardly breathe. Around 5 o'clock, when Farhan finally entered the room, I angrily asked him where he had been. I wanted to tell him about his friend's behavior, but Farhan turned the tables and got mad at me. "Why did you need to go near the garage?" he demanded. "I just stepped out to grab a cold drink. Why do you always follow me around spying on me? Can't I spend some time with my friend? We do a bit of work in the garage together, you know. I need money to fulfill your request, which is why I do extra work at night with my friend. Next time, don't leave the room without reason." Rather than listening to and understanding my concerns, my husband essentially confined me to the room as if it were a prison. That night, I spent hours crying, but he showed no mercy. Before our marriage, he would say he'd give his life for me. Now, after marriage, he had changed so much that I was shocked. The next day after he woke up, he left for work again. When he returned in the evening, he was once again carrying meat and other ingredients for kebabs. I quietly took the bag and began to see myself as nothing more than a servant. I realized that I would have to endure this punishment my whole life, all because I had eloped and defied my parents to marry Farhan. Once again, I prepared the kebabs as I did every day. My shoulders were aching badly from the constant grinding, but no one seemed to care. That night, my husband came home once again with his Pathan friend. I was furious. He had told me to stay confined inside the house, yet he never set boundaries for his friend. If he was going to bring him over, then at least he should have kept him in the drawing room or the garage. Instead, they both wandered freely throughout the house. How long could I keep hiding myself from him? It was challenging enough to work in the kitchen with my dupatta on, so I often ended up cooking in a disheveled state without it. His friend would easily find his way to me. That night was no different. I was frying kebabs when I felt him standing behind me. Suddenly, he reached out and pushed my hair back from my face, pulling it away from my shoulders. My hair had been falling forward, and I was getting frustrated, but my hands were dirty, so I couldn't fix it. He took the liberty of doing it himself. Startled, I stepped back and he said, "Bobby, be careful while cooking. You wouldn't want anything to spoil your beauty." There was something so strange in his gaze that I felt utterly embarrassed. I turned back to the stove, trying to shield myself from his eyes, but he remained standing behind me, and in frustration, I told him to go to the garage and that I'd send the kebabs over once they were ready. He replied that since Farhan had gone out on an errand, he would just wait here and take the kebabs himself. My anger toward my husband grew. Every day he would leave his friend behind and disappear somewhere. His friend lingered near me for quite some time, and when the kebabs were finally ready, he brushed my hands with his fingers as he took the plate. A jolt ran through me, and I quickly stepped back. He laughed as he left, his laughter igniting a fire within me. I realized then that he had done it on purpose. I thought about telling Farhan everything, but I knew it would be useless. He would get angry without even hearing me out. He had a short temper and a deep loyalty to his friend. After the friend left, tears began rolling down my cheeks. I came from a respectable and decent family. My only mistake was that I had fallen blindly in love with Farhan. He had entered our house as a plumber, and I had been smitten by his looks. At that time, my parents were arranging my marriage with a good match. When I tried to refuse, my father did not listen. He said he couldn't marry me off to a plumber, a man he knew nothing about. By then, I was in regular contact with Farhan over the phone, and his love had completely blinded me. He would profess his deep love for me, swear he would live and die for me. I was so caught up in his web of love that I couldn't see the reason in my parents' words. When they fixed the wedding date, I didn't think twice. I held Farhan's hand and ran away from home in the middle of the night. Farhan had told me he had no family, that he lived alone, had his own house, and worked as a plumber. I thought I would lead a happy, fulfilling life with my beloved husband. But after the marriage, I realized there was more to him than just plumbing. He would bring home meat almost every day, have me make kebabs, and then sit in the garage until late at night doing who knows what. Whenever I asked, he would simply say that he was fixing things for people and that he and his friend were just working together in the garage. Before marriage, I had no idea he was so close to this Pathan friend. I only found out the day after we got married that he had a friend he was willing to sacrifice everything for. The two of them would spend late nights together, doing who knows what. From the very first day, his friend's frequent visits to our home started bothering me. But since the marriage was new, I stayed quiet. And when I finally decided to speak up against his friend, I was the one who faced backlash. I remained silent after that. At first it seemed tolerable, but what really troubled me was my husband spending all these late nights with his friend. Even more surprising was that whenever I made a request, no matter how expensive, he fulfilled it without hesitation. A plumber's income shouldn't have been enough to pay the household bills and satisfy his wife's costly desires. Yet he managed it all. I couldn't even ask him about it because he would say, "I do everything for you, and yet you question me?" Sometimes I would think maybe I was just overthinking. Perhaps my husband stayed up late working so he could afford the things I wanted. Somehow I kept trying to keep the wheels of life turning. Then one night I started feeling really strange. I was overcome with restlessness, maybe from loneliness or maybe because I missed my parents. Quietly on tiptoe, I made my way to the garage. I thought that if I could just see my husband, maybe I'd feel calmer. My mind was full of uneasy thoughts, but as soon as I reached the garage door, the voices I heard froze me in place. My husband was talking to his Pathan friend, saying, "She's a nice young girl. She must be around 20. She's beautiful. So what's the problem? We can enjoy her kebabs together." Hearing this felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. His friend laughed and replied, "You sure know how to pick them. Always the prettiest girls. That's why the kebabs taste so good. Plus, you get your meat from such a special place, and your wife's hands add such flavor." Farhan burst out laughing and said, "Exactly. I get the meat from a very special place. That's why the kebabs turn out so delicious." Then they both laughed loudly and my hands started shaking. Who were they talking about? Where was my husband getting the meat from? A wave of disgust surged through me. Disgust toward my husband, toward myself, and toward my own hands. My head started spinning, and I staggered back to my room, unsure whether I should confront my husband grab him by the collar, or just run away from this house. I felt a deep sense of fear toward my husband now. My condition worsened. When my husband finally came into the room, I was throwing up. He saw my state and took me to the hospital. I was trembling even in his presence. After the doctor examined me, they gave me news that felt like the sky crashing down on my head rather than bringing any joy. I was pregnant. That must have been why I had been feeling so unwell. My husband was thrilled and brought me back home. I, on the other hand, broke down into tears. I told him through sobs that I wouldn't be making kebabs for him anymore. He calmly replied, "That's okay. You're not well. Don't worry about it. I'll make them myself." I wanted to ask him so many questions, to confront him about everything I had heard. But I didn't have the courage. I had burned all my bridges when I came to live with Farhan. Now I had no place to go back to. I didn't even know what my husband was doing with those young girls. Was he actually making kebabs out of their meat? The thought alone made me feel sick. I locked myself in my room, overwhelmed by nausea every time I tried to eat or drink. If I so much as touched anything, the thought of that meat came flooding back. For the past 8 months, I had been grinding meat every day to make kebabs, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that it might have been human meat all along. Meanwhile, my husband and his friend had always eaten those kebabs with such relish, praising them to a degree that left me stunned. The next night, without saying a word to me, my husband ground the spices himself, made the kebabs, and then left for the garage. I was still unwell, but I was desperate to find out the whole truth. So once again, I quietly followed him to the garage and stood outside, listening intently. There I heard my husband and his friend hammering something. I couldn't see exactly what was happening inside the garage, but I could hear their voices clearly. My husband was speaking to his Pathan friend in an urgent tone, saying, "Hurry up, move your hands faster. We have to finish with that girl tonight so that tomorrow we can enjoy her kebabs. I'll handle her in a bit, and you make sure to keep my wife occupied." His friend responded with confidence. "Don't worry about your wife. I'll keep her busy. She won't cause any trouble. You just focus on getting everything ready." Their words sent shivers down my spine. What on earth were they talking about? What were they planning to do? I hesitated for a moment before taking a cautious step forward. Pressing my ear closer to the door, I heard my husband say, "She's young, probably 20, beautiful too. There shouldn't be any problem." His friend chuckled and added, "You always pick the prettiest ones. That's why the kebabs taste so much better. And you always manage to get the best quality meat. Plus, your wife's cooking adds the perfect touch." Hearing that exchange, my heart raced. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt as if the ground beneath me was shifting. My thoughts were a chaotic whirl. Who were they talking about? What did they mean by the best quality meat? The idea that they might actually be talking about human meat made my stomach turn. Summoning what courage I had left, I peeked inside the garage. My breath caught in my throat. There on the floor lay a young girl, completely still. My husband and his friend were stuffing her into a large sack. My legs felt weak, as if they would give out beneath me. I couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. My husband, the man I trusted with my life, was involved in something unthinkable. Without thinking, I stepped into the garage. Both of them froze, their eyes wide with shock. "What are you doing here?" my husband barked, his voice sharp and panicked. I ignored his question. "What is going on here?" I demanded. "Who is this girl? What are you doing with her? Are you eating kebabs made from human flesh? You're not men, you're monsters." My husband's face darkened as his expression shifted from surprise to anger. "Go back to the room," he snapped. "I'll explain later." But I didn't budge. I stood my ground, trembling with rage and disgust. "No," I said firmly. "You're going to explain now. Who is she? Is she alive or dead?" I wanted answers, and I wasn't going to let him brush me off. Gritting his teeth, my husband gave me a piercing glare. "She's only unconscious," he said. "We don't eat human flesh. We're not cannibals. He hesitated before finally admitting, "We're involved in smuggling girls. We kidnap them, then sell them to brothels. The money we earn allows us to live the way we want. That's what we do. Just like I trapped you with love, I lure these girls too. I'm attractive, so it's easy for me. Any girl would fall for me. Once they trust me enough to leave their homes, I drug them, and then we sell them. I would have done the same to you, but I fell in love with you. That's why I made you my wife." I was stunned. His confession shattered the illusion I had held on to. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. The man I loved was a predator, a deceiver, and a criminal. I couldn't believe I had fallen for him. He turned to his friend and gestured for him to take me back to the room. His friend grabbed my arm, roughly pulling me along. My husband, on the other hand, continued with his grim task. He finished tying the sack and left the garage, carrying the unconscious girl. His friend dragged me into the house, shoving me into the bedroom and onto the bed. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice cold and calculating. Every day, I had to hold myself back because of my friend. But now that he's gone and now that you know the truth, I know you won't stay here much longer. So why shouldn't I take what I've always wanted? His words sent a chill through my entire body. I could see it in his eyes. He was ready to act on his twisted desires. Both he and my husband had lost any shred of humanity long ago. Their morals were dead, replaced by greed and lust. And now my husband had essentially left me at the mercy of this man. I refused to let him have his way. As he reached out toward me, I grabbed the nearest object, a metal stand, and swung it at his head. He stumbled back, clutching his head as blood began to drip down his face. I didn't waste a second. I ran out of the room, my heart pounding like a drum. He chased me, but his injury slowed him down. I ran through the house, out the door, and onto the street, my breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. The night was silent except for the sound of my own footsteps echoing in my ears. My only thought was to escape, to find help. As I ran, my vision blurred and the world around me spun. I collapsed on the pavement, unable to go any further. By some miracle, I had fallen in front of a police van. I heard voices calling out to me before everything went black. When I woke up, I was surrounded by police officers. I told them everything. About my husband, his friend, the girl, and the horrifying business they were running. The officers listened, their faces grim. They assured me that they would take action. Soon after, they arrested both my husband and his friend. The authorities brought me back to my parents' home. My parents were heartbroken and angry. They barely spoke to me, but they offered me shelter under their roof. I sat on my mother's doorstep, feeling utterly defeated. I had lost everything, but at least I was safe. 3 months have passed since that night. I am pregnant now, sitting here waiting for my child to be born. My parents remain silent, their disappointment hanging heavy in the air. But I am grateful for the roof over my head. When I think back on all that has happened, my skin crawls. I can't believe the nightmare I endured. Looking into my future, I know it won't be easy. I've learned a hard lesson. Never trust blindly, and never let sweet words cloud your judgment. I want all women to remember this. Never let yourself be swept away by charm alone. True love does not hide secrets or bring harm. It is honest, kind, and safe. I hope that by sharing my story, I can help others avoid the trap I fell into. Let my pain and suffering serve as a warning, so no one else has to endure what I went through.